10-year anniversary trip, a dream meticulously planned. For Dr. Anya Sharma and her husband Ben Carter, their first-class tickets on Etheria Global were more than just seats. They were a symbol of a decade of hard work and love. They were meant to be whisked away from New York to Geneva in unparalleled luxury. But their dream was shattered in the blink of an eye by the icy stare of a man who believed his wealth made him king. They were told their seats, their tickets, their very presence was a mistake. Little did anyone on that plane know, this single act of breathtaking arrogance wouldn't just ruin a vacation. It would be the catalyst that would ground an entire airline and expose a scandal that would rock the aviation world to its core. The Etheria Global Oasis Lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was designed to be a sanctuary, a hermetically sealed bubble of tranquility against the chaotic symphony of Terminal 4. For Dr. Anya Sharma and Ben Carter, it felt like stepping into another dimension. 10 years, a full decade since they stood opposite each other, young and brimming with a nervous energy that felt electric and promised a lifetime. Now the nervous energy had matured into a deep, comfortable certainty, a quiet strength that emanated from them as a couple. This trip was their celebration, a reward for a decade of shared struggles and triumphs. Anya, a respected astrophysicist whose recent work on gravitational lensing had earned her a keynote speaking position at a prestigious conference in Geneva, ran a hand over the smooth, cool marble of the countertop. She watched the bubbles rise in her champagne flute, each tiny sphere a perfect, fleeting world. "I can't believe we're actually doing this, Ben," she murmured, her voice a low hum of contentment. Her dark eyes, usually focused on the distant mysteries of the cosmos, were soft and fixed on her husband. She had spent the last year buried in data, her mind light years away. This trip was a chance to be present, to be just Anya, not Dr. Sharma. Ben, an architect whose firm had just won a major contract to design a new sustainable art museum, squeezed her hand. His hands were strong and calloused, a map of the models he'd built and the plans he'd drawn, yet his touch was always gentle. "We earned it," he said, his warm baritone a familiar comfort. "You especially. Mapping the universe is hard work. You deserve to be treated like a star for a few hours." He looked around the lounge, taking in the architectural details with a professional eye. The soaring ceilings, the strategically placed ficus trees, the soft, recessed lighting designed to soothe the weary traveler. It was a masterpiece of manufactured serenity. Waitstaff in crisp, dark uniforms glided between clusters of leather armchairs, offering tiny, exquisite canapes and refilling glasses with a practiced, unobtrusive grace. The air was scented with something expensive and vaguely floral. It was the smell of money, Ben thought with a wry smile, the smell of a world deliberately insulated from the one just outside its frosted glass doors, where tired families wrestled with luggage and argued over gate changes. They had always been frugal, prioritizing their work, their home, and their future over lavish expenses. They flew coach, they packed their own snacks. They viewed travel as a means to an end. But for their 10th anniversary, they had agreed to splurge. Ben had spent weeks researching, reading reviews, and finally settling on Etheria Global's first-class suite. It was legendary among travel bloggers, fully enclosed private pods, gourmet meals designed by a celebrity chef, vintage champagne on tap, and service that anticipated your every need. It was an absurd indulgence, and they were both giddy with the prospect of it. Their conversation was light and happy, a tapestry woven from shared memories and future dreams. They talked about the first tiny apartment they had shared, the one with the rattling radiator and the window that looked out onto a brick wall. They laughed about the disastrous camping trip where a raccoon had stolen all their food. They spoke of the conference in Geneva, of the colleagues Anya was excited to see, and of the few days they had planned afterward to explore the Swiss Alps, just the two of them, disconnected from the demands of their careers. Boarding for Etheria Global Flight 117 to Geneva will commence in 10 minutes at Gate A7. We invite our first-class passengers to begin boarding at this time. The announcement, delivered in a calm, multilingual voice, cut through their reverie. Anya felt a fresh thrill of excitement. "That's us. We're first-class passengers." She said the words slowly, tasting them, as if they belonged to a foreign language. Ben grinned, finishing his champagne. Let's go see what all the fuss is about. They gathered their carry-on bags, Ben's a sleek leather messenger bag containing his sketchbook and a novel. Anya's a more functional tote filled with her laptop and a thick binder of notes for her presentation. As they walked toward the gate, they felt a subtle shift in the way people looked at them. The moment their boarding passes, heavy cardstock with the bold first printed in gold, were scanned, the gate agent's professional demeanor warmed into a deferential smile. "Welcome, Dr. Sharma, Mr. Carter. Right this way. Please enjoy your flight." They walked down the exclusive jet bridge, the carpeting plush under their feet. The mundane tunnel of the typical boarding process was transformed. This one was wider, brighter, and led directly to the front door of the massive Airbus A380. As they stepped onto the aircraft, they were greeted by a flight attendant whose smile was as polished as her pearl earrings. "Good morning, Dr. Sharma, Mr. Carter. Welcome aboard. My name is Claire, and I will be your purser for today's flight to Geneva. Your suites are 1A and 1B. Right this way." The first-class cabin was even more impressive than the pictures had suggested. It was less like an airplane and more like a futuristic luxury hotel lobby. There were only 8 suites in the entire forward cabin of the upper deck, each one a private cocoon of cream-colored leather and polished burled wood. Anya found her seat, 1A, by the window. She ran her hand over the supple leather, touched the cool metal of the personal lamp, and peered into the small, fully stocked minibar. A pair of noise-canceling headphones rested in a sculpted alcove next to a large, high-definition screen. A small amenity kit from a designer brand was artfully placed on the ottoman. "This is insane," Ben whispered, settling into 1B, the adjoining suite in the center. A retractable privacy screen between them was currently lowered, allowing them to still feel like they were together. "There's more legroom here than in our first living room." Anya laughed, a pure, happy sound. She took off her jacket and hung it in the tiny personal closet within her suite. She was just beginning to explore the seat's myriad of electronic controls when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting to see Claire offering her a pre-departure drink. Instead, she saw a man. He was in his late 60s, tall and imperious, with a shock of perfectly coiffed silver hair and a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer of mild disdain. He wore a navy blue cashmere blazer that probably cost more than their first car, and on his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch glinted under the cabin lights. Behind him stood a younger man, clutching 2 briefcases, his expression a mixture of anxiety and obsequiousness. The older man looked down at Anya, his pale blue eyes sweeping over her with an unnerving lack of recognition, as if she were not a person, but a piece of furniture that was out of place. "You're in my seat," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of indisputable fact. Anya blinked, taken aback by his tone. She glanced at the number above her suite, Earn A. Then she looked at her boarding pass resting on the console. 1A. She offered a polite, slightly confused smile. "I'm sorry, I think there must be a misunderstanding. My boarding pass says 1A. The man didn't even glance at her ticket. He simply waved a dismissive hand in the air. "That's impossible. I am always 1A. "Gregory," he snapped without turning his head. The younger man, Gregory, fumbled with one of the briefcases and produced a ticket holder. "Yes, Mr. Thorne, it's right here, 1A. "See?" The man, Mr. Thorne, said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Now, if you don't mind," he gestured for her to get up, a flick of his wrist that one might use to shoo away a stray cat. The dream, so carefully constructed, so joyfully anticipated, began to fray at the edges. The gilded cage of the first-class cabin suddenly felt very small and very cold. Ben, who had been observing the exchange from his seat, unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He moved to Anya's side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. He was taller than Thorne, with a broader build, but his posture was non-threatening, his expression one of calm inquiry. "Excuse me, sir," Ben said, his voice even. "There's obviously a mix-up with the airline system. We can sort this out. My wife's ticket is for 1A, and mine is for 1B. Perhaps your ticket is for a different flight?" Harrison Thorne turned his icy gaze on Ben. He surveyed him from head to toe, a slow, deliberate appraisal that was designed to intimidate and diminish. He noted Ben's comfortable but not extravagant clothing, the well-worn jeans, the simple cashmere sweater. His eyes lingered for a fraction of a second too long on their dark skin. A subtle yet unmistakable flicker of something ugly passed through his expression before it was once again masked by a veneer of aristocratic annoyance. "Young man," Thorne began, his voice laced with a patronizing drawl, "I have been flying Etheria Global for over 20 years. I am a member of their exclusive chairman's circle. I have a standing reservation for seat 1A on this particular flight, which I take twice a month. The system does not make a mix-up where I'm concerned. The mistake, I assure you, is yours." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His power was a palpable aura, an unshakable certainty in his own superiority that filled the space around him. Gregory, his assistant, nodded vigorously in agreement, looking at Anya and Ben as if they were squatters who had audaciously set up camp in a royal palace. Claire, the purser, who had been attending to another passenger, noticed the standoff and hurried over, her professional smile looking strained. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her tone immediately deferential toward the silver-haired man. "Yes, Claire, there is a problem," Thorne said, not taking his eyes off Ben. "These people are in my suite." Claire's eyes darted nervously between Thorne's imperious face and Anya's boarding pass, which Anya was holding out for her to see. The flight attendant's composure wavered. She was caught between the airline's own documented proof and the unyielding will of a very important customer. "I see, Dr. Sharma," Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. She then turned to Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, I do apologize. Let me just check the manifest on my tablet. There must be a simple explanation." She tapped rapidly on the device, her brow furrowed in concentration. Anya and Ben waited, a sense of surreal disbelief washing over them. They had followed every rule, paid the exorbitant fare, and had the proof in their hands. Yet they were the ones being treated as interlopers. The other first-class passengers were beginning to take notice, peering over the walls of their suites with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance at the delay. "This is very strange," Claire said, looking up from her tablet, her face pale. "The system does show Dr. Sharma and Mr. Carter assigned to 1A and 1B, but it also— Mr. Thorne, your name is here as well. It appears to be a duplicate booking, a very rare and unfortunate computer glitch." Thorne scoffed, a short, sharp sound of contempt. "A glitch? Don't be absurd. There is no glitch. There is simply incompetence. An incompetence which you will now rectify." "Of course, Mr. Thorne," Claire said quickly. She then turned to Anya and Ben, her professional smile now looking more like a grimace. "I am so terribly sorry for this confusion. We do have 2 other seats available in first class, 4D and 4F. They are in the rear of the cabin." Anya stared at her, incredulous. "You want us to move? We booked these specific seats 6 months ago. We wanted to be together, and these are the only 2 adjoining suites." Suites 4D and 4F were single pods on opposite sides of the aisle. "It's our anniversary," Ben added, his voice still calm but now with a hard edge of disbelief. "This was supposed to be special. We're not moving to separate seats." Thorne let out an exasperated sigh, as if dealing with recalcitrant children. "For God's sake, what does it matter? It's a 7-hour flight. You'll survive being 10 feet apart. Take the other seats." "No," Anya said. Her voice was quiet, but it resonated with an authority that made Claire flinch and even gave Thorne pause. She was a scientist, a woman who dealt in facts and logic, and the facts were clear. They were in their assigned seats, and this man was using his perceived status to bully them out. It was a matter of principle, a principle that was now solidifying into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "We will not be moving." The standoff intensified. The air in the cabin grew thick with tension. Thorne's face, which had been a mask of arrogant boredom, was now darkening with anger. He was not accustomed to being denied. He saw the world as a series of doors that opened for him, and these 2 people were a door that was refusing to budge. "Claire," Thorne said, his voice dangerously low, "this is becoming tedious. I have a very important meeting in Geneva. I expect to be seated and comfortable, with a glass of scotch in my hand within the next 3 minutes. Solve this problem." The implicit threat hung in the air. Solve this meant get them out of his seat. Claire swallowed hard. Her job, her career, likely depended on keeping men like Harrison Thorne happy. The happiness of a one-time customer, regardless of how much they paid for their ticket, was a secondary concern. "Dr. Sharma, Mr. Carter," she pleaded, her eyes begging for their cooperation. "Please, I must insist. We can offer you a travel voucher. Some compensation for the inconvenience." "It's not about compensation," Ben said, cutting her off. "It's about respect. This man is trying to take something that belongs to us, and you are helping him." "He is a Chairman's Circle member," Claire whispered, as if that explained and excused everything. Anya felt a surge of cold fury. "And what are we? Just random customers whose reservations are meaningless?" From behind Thorne, Gregory, the assistant, finally spoke up, his voice reedy and nervous. "Mr. Thorne's contribution to this airline's revenue is significant. The system is designed to prioritize him. The glitch probably happened when your booking was processed. It should have been flagged." The admission, intended to be helpful to his boss, was damning. He had just confirmed that Etheria's system was intentionally designed to displace other paying customers for the sake of its elite clientele. It wasn't a glitch, it was a feature. Anya's eyes narrowed. The scientist in her latched onto the new data. This wasn't just about one rude man. This was about a corrupt and biased system. The fight was no longer just about 2 seats on an airplane. It was about something much bigger. "So you're saying the airline knowingly double-booked the seat and assumed we would just meekly move when their significant customer showed up?" Anya asked, her voice clear and carrying through the now silent cabin. Before the flustered Claire or the terrified Gregory could answer, Thorne stepped forward, invading Anya's personal space. He leaned in, his voice a low growl. "I don't know who you think you are," he hissed, the scent of expensive cologne and something bitter, like entitlement, wafting from him. "But you are delaying my flight. You are delaying all of these people. Now, for the last time, get out of my seat before you regret it." The raw aggression in Harrison Thorne's voice changed the atmosphere from tense to toxic. The thin veneer of civility was gone, replaced by the ugly reality of a power play. Ben instinctively moved slightly in front of Anya, a protective gesture that was subtle but firm. "Sir, you need to back up," Ben said, his voice dropping to a low, warning tone. He did not make a threatening move, but his presence was a solid, unmovable wall. "You will not speak to my wife that way." Thorne straightened up, a smirk playing on his lips. He seemed to relish the confrontation, to enjoy the spectacle of his own power. "Or what? What will you do?" he taunted. The situation was spiraling out of control. Claire, the purser, looked panicked. She spoke urgently into the small phone connected to the cabin's internal system. "I need a gate agent at the door of 117 immediately. We have a seating dispute that requires intervention." Within a minute, a woman in an Etheria Global ground staff uniform appeared at the cabin door. She looked harassed and overworked, her name tag reading Brenda. She surveyed the scene. The immovable couple, the furious VIP, the anxious flight attendant, with an expression of deep weariness. This was clearly not the first time she had been called to deal with such a situation. "What's the issue here?" Brenda asked, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Claire quickly explained the duplicate booking, carefully phrasing it to minimize the airline's fault and emphasize the inconvenience to Mr. Thorne. Brenda listened, her eyes flicking toward Thorne with a flicker of recognition and dread. She knew who he was. Brenda's gaze then settled on Anya and Ben. There was no warmth, no empathy. Just a tired, bureaucratic assessment of the problem. "I have your boarding passes here," she said, holding up printouts from the gate, "and I see the conflict. Sir, ma'am, I understand you're in the seats your passes indicate, but Mr. Thorne has priority status. In these cases, airline policy dictates that we must accommodate our highest-tier members." Anya couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So your policy is to honor his ticket, but not ours? We both paid. We both have a contract with your airline for these specific seats." "It's not about the payment," Brenda said, her patience wearing thin. "It's about a loyalty program. It's in the terms and conditions. We have the right to change seat assignments for operational reasons." "This isn't an operational reason," Ben countered, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "The plane isn't overweight and the seat isn't broken. The operational reason is that this man wants our seats and you're giving them to him." The conversation was going in circles, a maddening loop of corporate doublespeak and veiled threats. It was clear that to the airline staff, Anya and Ben were not valued customers. They were a problem to be managed. Harrison Thorne was the asset to be protected. The other passengers were now openly staring, some murmuring in annoyance about the delay, others watching the drama with detached interest. A man in seat 2C, a businessman in a crumpled suit, sighed loudly and said, "Just take the other seats. We all want to get going." The comment stung, adding a layer of public humiliation to their private struggle. They were being painted as the troublemakers, the ones selfishly holding up a plane full of people. Thorne, sensing the tide of opinion turning in his favor, crossed his arms. "The pilot will not take off until this is resolved. You are holding up over 300 people. Think about that, all because you can't bear to sit across the aisle from each other." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He was the one causing the entire situation, yet he had masterfully framed them as the villains. Anya, feeling a wave of desperation and anger, decided to change tactics. She took out her phone. "Fine," she said, her voice clear and steady. "What is your full name, sir?" Thorne looked at her, amused. "Harrison Thorne." "And you are?" she asked, her phone's camera now pointed at the gate agent. "Brenda Walsh, your name," the agent replied, her eyes widening in alarm as she realized she was being recorded. "Ma'am, you can't do that." "I can and I will," Anya said calmly. "I am documenting this. I am documenting Etheria Global's policy of discriminating against paying customers. I am documenting your refusal to honor our tickets, and I am documenting Mr. Thorne's behavior." The atmosphere shifted again. The phone was a weapon, a tool that could instantly move this private humiliation into the public square. Brenda looked nervously at Claire. Gregory, Thorne's assistant, began whispering urgently to his boss. Thorne, however, was unfazed. "Record all you want," he sneered. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you think a little video on your social media page is going to make a difference? I could buy this entire rust bucket airline and sell it for scrap if I felt like it. Your video will be a momentary amusement before it disappears. Now give it up." His arrogance was a fortress, seemingly impenetrable. He truly believed he was untouchable. It was then that the cockpit door opened. The hushed reverence that usually accompanies the appearance of a pilot fell over the cabin. But this was not the smiling, avuncular captain one sees in airline commercials. This was a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, a stern set to her jaw, and silver captain stripes gleaming on her epaulets. Her name tag read Eva Rostova. She looked at the scene in her forward galley with an expression of profound irritation. "What in God's name is holding up my departure?" Captain Rostova demanded, her voice cutting through the tension with the precision of a scalpel. It held a faint, unplaceable Eastern European accent, and it carried an absolute, unquestionable authority that made even Harrison Thorne blink. Captain Eva Rostova was not a woman who suffered fools gladly. She had spent 30 years in the male-dominated field of aviation, working her way up from a flight engineer on old Soviet cargo planes to the captain of one of the world's most advanced passenger jets. She had seen it all. Engine failures over the Atlantic, emergency landings in sandstorms, and more than her fair share of entitled passengers. She ran her ship with military precision and had zero tolerance for nonsense, especially when it threatened an on-time departure. Brenda, the gate agent, immediately began to explain the situation to the captain, framing it in the familiar, corporate-approved language of priority status, seating conflicts, and customer accommodation. Captain Rostova listened, her gaze moving from the flustered Brenda to the smug Harrison Thorne, and finally to Anya and Ben, who stood their ground, their faces a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. When Brenda finished, the captain was silent for a long moment. She looked at the manifest on Claire's tablet, her eyes scanning the data. Then she looked directly at Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of the deference he was used to, "I see you are a Chairman's Circle member. I also see that Dr. Sharma and Mr. Carter have confirmed ticketed reservations for seats 1A and 1B, which were booked and paid for half a year ago. Your own reservation for this flight appears to have been processed only last week." The revelation hung in the air. Gregory, the assistant, looked as if he might faint. Thorne's booking was not a long-standing arrangement. It was a recent demand that the system had been forced to accommodate by bumping other passengers. Thorne's sneer faltered for a second. My travel is often arranged on short notice. That is irrelevant. The rules are the rules. The primary rule on my aircraft, sir, is safety. The second is federal aviation law, Captain Rostova stated coolly. And FAA regulations are quite clear. The final authority in all matters pertaining to the aircraft, its crew, and its passengers rests with the pilot in command. That's me. And in my professional judgment, the passengers who are holding valid original boarding passes for seats 1A and 1B are the ones who are entitled to sit there. A collective gasp went through the small audience in the cabin. The captain had just sided with Anya and Ben. Claire looked relieved, Brenda looked shocked, and Harrison Thorne looked, for the first time, genuinely furious. This is an outrage, he thundered, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. Do you know who you're talking to? I will have your job for this. I will call Richard Sterling himself. Richard Sterling was the CEO of Etheria Global. The name was meant to be a trump card, a final, unanswerable show of power. Captain Rostova did not flinch. You are welcome to call whomever you like once we are on the ground in Geneva. For now, you have two options. You can take a seat in 4D or you can deplane. We are already 20 minutes behind schedule. She turned to Anya and Ben. Please take your seats. I apologize for this disturbance. It felt like a victory, a huge, resounding win for decency and fairness. Anya and Ben exchanged a look of profound relief and gratitude. Ben gave the captain a nod of deep respect. They settled back into their seats, the supple leather now feeling like a well-deserved comfort, but their relief was short-lived. Harrison Thorne, his face purple with rage, pulled out his phone. He stabbed at the screen with a trembling finger. We'll see about this, you arrogant woman, he muttered. He put the phone to his ear. The rest of the cabin waited with bated breath. Richard, it's Harrison. Yes, I'm on the plane. Or I'm supposed to be. No, there's a problem. A ridiculous problem. Your captain is refusing to accommodate me. Yes, on Flight 117, she's siding with some other passengers. Unacceptable. You need to handle this. Now. He snapped the phone shut and stared daggers at Captain Rostova, a triumphant, venomous look in his eyes. The captain held his gaze, her expression unreadable, but her jaw tight. A silent battle of wills was taking place at 30,000 feet before the plane had even left the gate. Less than 2 minutes later, the phone in Claire's hand buzzed. It was a call from the Central Operations Center. She answered, listened, and her face went ashen. She approached the captain and spoke in a hushed, urgent whisper. Captain Rostova listened, her stoic expression slowly crumbling into one of disbelief, then quiet fury. The color drained from her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a physical blow. When she opened them, they looked tired and defeated. She walked slowly back to where Anya and Ben were seated. The authority in her posture was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. Dr. Sharma, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice heavy with regret. I have just received a direct order from the executive office of Etheria Global. It has been relayed to me that if you do not vacate seats 1A and 1B and accept the alternative, you will be removed from the flight for being disruptive passengers. The injustice of it was a physical blow. To be called disruptive when they had been the ones subjected to harassment and abuse was a grotesque inversion of the truth. But you're the captain, Anya said, her voice trembling slightly. You said you had the final authority. I do, Captain Rostova said, her voice laced with bitterness. I have the authority to delay this flight further by refusing the order, which will result in my immediate suspension pending an inquiry. Or I can comply and get my other 342 passengers to their destination. They have put me in an impossible position, and they have done the same to you. The wall of indifference they had first encountered had now become a wall of active, corporate-sanctioned hostility. Harrison Thorne was smirking, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face. He had won. He had proven that his power, his money, and his connections were more valuable than their rights, more important than the captain's authority, and more powerful than basic human decency. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the first-class cabin. Anya looked at Ben, her heart aching with the sting of humiliation. They had fought, they had stood on principle, and they had been crushed by a system designed to protect the powerful. To be forcibly removed from the flight, branded as disruptive, would be the final indignity. It could go on their travel record, causing problems for years to come. Ben took her hand. His was steady, a rock in the turbulent sea of their emotions. "It's not worth it, Anya," he said softly, his eyes locking with hers. "We're not the ones in the wrong here. Let's not let them twist this any further." He was right. Their dignity was not tied to these two seats. Their dignity was in how they conducted themselves. With a slow, deliberate movement, Anya began to gather her things from the various compartments of the suite. Every motion was precise, controlled, betraying none of the raging injustice she felt inside. Ben did the same. They would not give Thorne the satisfaction of seeing them break. As they stood ready to leave, a young man in seat 3A, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes, held up his phone. "I've got the whole thing on video," he whispered to them as they passed. "From the moment he threatened you, I'm a travel blogger. My name is Sam Peterson. This is not okay." Another passenger, an older woman in a beautifully tailored suit, leaned into the aisle. "I'm a lawyer," she said quietly. "What they've just done is a clear breach of contract, at the very least. Here's my card. Call me." A small current of support began to flow through the cabin. Whispers of disgust aimed at Thorne, and the airline started to circulate. The man in 2C, who had earlier told them to move now, had the decency to look ashamed. But it was too little, too late. As Anya and Ben walked toward the door defeated, Harrison Thorne settled into seat 1A. He didn't even look at them. He simply snapped his fingers at Claire. "A Macallan 25. Neat, and be quick about it." The casual cruelty of the gesture was the final twist of the knife. With their carry-on bags in hand, they stepped off the plane and back into the jet bridge. Brenda, the gate agent, refused to meet their eyes. She thrust a set of new boarding passes at them for a different airline's flight the next day, along with 2 hotel and meal vouchers. It was a paltry, insulting gesture. "Our luggage is on that plane," Ben stated flatly. "It will be taken off before departure," Brenda mumbled, before turning away to deal with the flight's paperwork. They walked in silence back into the bustling terminal at JFK. The manufactured serenity of the Oasis Lounge felt a world away. They were just 2 more travelers stranded in the impersonal chaos of the airport. The weight of the humiliation pressed down on them. It wasn't just about the seats. It was the feeling of being rendered invisible, of their worth being summarily dismissed because they didn't have the right name or the right connections. They found a quiet corner near a charging station and sat down, the reality of the situation sinking in. They had missed their flight. Anya's meticulously planned schedule for the Geneva conference was now in disarray. "I'm so sorry, Ben," Anya said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't just move when he first asked. I made things worse." Ben wrapped his arm around her. "Don't you dare apologize. You did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong. We stood up for ourselves. That's what we do." As he spoke, his phone buzzed. Then Anya's buzzed. Then they both began to vibrate incessantly. Puzzled, Anya looked at her screen. It was flooded with notifications from X, formerly known as Twitter. Sam Peterson, the travel blogger, had already posted his first video. He had a significant following, and his post, tagged with Etheria Nightmare and Flying While Black, was exploding. He had live-tweeted the entire saga, from Thorne's initial demand to the captain's intervention and the corporate override. He named Harrison Thorne. He named Captain Eva Rostova. He posted a photo of Anya and Ben's original boarding passes. The story was a digital wildfire. The video of Thorne's sneering face and the captain's defeated expression was being shared thousands of times a minute. News outlets, always hungry for stories of corporate malfeasance and racial injustice, were starting to pick it up. The comment section was a torrent of outrage directed at Etheria Global and Harrison Thorne. People were sharing their own horror stories about the airline. The hashtag was trending worldwide. While they were sitting in the terminal, dejected and humiliated, the story of their humiliation had become a global phenomenon. Anya watched the notifications scroll by. a dizzying stream of support from total strangers. The small, ugly incident on the plane was no longer a private shame. It was a public indictment. Meanwhile, on Flight 117, now finally pushing back from the gate, Harrison Thorne was sipping his scotch. He was oblivious to the storm brewing online. He had won, and that was all that mattered. He glanced at his phone, saw a few news alerts about his own company, Thorne Capital, and dismissed them. He was about to put his phone into airplane mode when a new urgent headline flashed across the screen from a major financial news network. Etheria Global, AETG, stock plummets amid viral passenger dispute and rumors of imminent bankruptcy. Thorne froze, the glass halfway to his lips. He read the headline again. Bankruptcy? That was impossible. He knew the company was struggling. In fact, he was counting on it. His consortium was in the final stages of a secret negotiation to buy out Etheria's debt and acquire the company for a fraction of its value. The plan depended on the airline's troubles staying quiet until the deal was done. This public relations catastrophe was the worst possible thing that could have happened. It would draw unwanted scrutiny. It would attract other bidders. It would tank the stock price before his group was ready to buy, potentially jeopardizing the entire deal. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his partner in the deal. It was just one word: abort. The color drained from Harrison Thorne's face. The victory he had savored just moments before now tasted like ash in his mouth. He looked out the small airplane window, but he didn't see the tarmac of JFK. He saw the architecture of his multi-billion-dollar deal, so carefully constructed, beginning to crumble into dust. And he had been the one to light the match. The story of Flight 117 was the perfect storm. It combined themes of racial injustice, corporate greed, and the abuse of power into one easily digestible, infuriating narrative. For Etheria Global, an airline already teetering on the brink of financial collapse, it was a death blow. What the public and even most of the airline's employees didn't know was that Etheria had been secretly insolvent for months. They were saddled with crippling debt from a fleet modernization program that had gone massively over budget. Rising fuel costs and a series of labor disputes had bled their cash reserves dry. They had been cooking the books, shuffling assets between shell corporations, and barely making payroll, all while maintaining the outward illusion of luxury and success. Harrison Thorne was not just a frequent flyer. He was a predator circling a wounded animal. Through his position as a major creditor, he had insider knowledge of Etheria's true financial state. His plan was simple and ruthless: use his leverage to push the airline towards a quiet, controlled bankruptcy, then have his investment consortium, Thorne Capital, sweep in and buy the valuable assets, the landing slots, the routes, the newer planes, for pennies on the dollar, leaving the shareholders, employees, and smaller creditors with nothing. The deal was in its final, delicate stages and depended on absolute secrecy. The viral video and the subsequent public outcry shattered that secrecy. Journalists, spurred by the human interest story of Anya and Ben, started digging deeper into Etheria. Why was one customer so powerful? Who was Harrison Thorne? As they pulled on that thread, the entire rotten tapestry of the airline's finances began to unravel. Competing investment firms, alerted by the sudden media attention and the stock's nosedive, began their own research, preparing rival bids and spoiling the exclusivity of Thorne's deal. Worse, the intense scrutiny brought unwanted attention from regulators. The Federal Aviation Administration, which had been receiving a slow trickle of anonymous complaints about Etheria's maintenance practices for months, was now under public pressure to act. The complaints, which had been languishing in a bureaucratic backlog, were suddenly top priority. One of those anonymous tips had come from Captain Eva Rostova. An hour after being forced to comply with the executive order, sitting in her hotel room in Geneva, she had filed a detailed, damning report with the FAO's whistleblower hotline. She outlined not only the passenger incident, but also a pattern of corporate pressure to cut corners on safety checks, to fly planes with known but non-critical mechanical issues, and to extend crew duty times beyond the recommended limits. She had been collecting evidence for years, waiting for the right moment. The airline's betrayal of her authority and its shameful treatment of Anya and Ben was that moment. She was risking her career, but her conscience would allow nothing less. Back at JFK, Anya and Ben were being treated like heroes. The airport manager himself had come to find them, offering a sincere and profuse apology on behalf of the Port Authority. Another airline, a major competitor of Etherea's, had reached out via social media. "Dr. Sharma, Mr. Carter," their tweet read, "we are appalled by your treatment. A private car is waiting to take you to a hotel for the night, on us, and we would be honored to fly you to Geneva tomorrow morning in our Polaris Global First Suite. Your work is too important to be disrupted by intolerance." The offer was a brilliant PR move for the rival airline. But for Anya and Ben, it was a welcome balm on a raw wound. They accepted gratefully. As they were escorted through the terminal, people recognized them. They offered words of support, thumbs-ups, and quiet applause. The feeling of humiliation was slowly being replaced by a sense of empowerment. They hadn't been a disruptive problem. They had been a catalyst for change. News reporters were now gathered outside the terminal. They were swarmed with requests for interviews. Ben handled the cameras with a quiet grace, while Anya, a natural public speaker used to explaining complex ideas, articulated their experience with clarity and precision. "This was never about a seat," she told one reporter, her voice steady and strong. "It was about the simple expectation that you will be treated with dignity and respect. It was about an airline and a passenger who believed that money and status could place them above the rules of common decency. We hope that by sharing our story, we can ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." As their story led the evening news, the financial news channels were reporting on the chaos engulfing Ethereum Global. The stock, which had been trading at $12 a share that morning, had entered a death spiral. Trading was halted twice. By the market's close, it was worth less than $1. The bankruptcy rumors were now being confirmed by inside sources. Thorn Capital issued a curt statement announcing it had withdrawn its interest in any potential acquisition of Ethereum Global's assets. The deal was officially dead. Harrison Thorne's carefully planned corporate raid had been undone by his own petty tyranny. The final, fatal blow came late that evening. Acting on the credible whistleblower reports, corroborated by a frantic, day-long investigation, the FAA issued an emergency order. Effective immediately, the Federal Aviation Administration has grounded the entire fleet of Ethereum Global Airways, citing serious concerns regarding the airline's financial viability and safety compliance. All Ethereum aircraft, domestic and international, are ordered to cease operations pending a full and comprehensive audit. The announcement was a nuclear bomb dropped on the airline industry. An entire international airline shut down in an instant. Not just one flight, not just one plane. All of them. Worldwide. The ripple effects of the FAA's order were immediate and catastrophic. Ethereum Global planes that were in the air were ordered to land at the nearest suitable airport. Flights preparing for departure were canceled, their passengers told to deplane. The airline's website was replaced with a single stark notice about the suspension of service. The company had ceased to exist in a matter of hours. Chaos erupted at airports around the world. Tens of thousands of Ethereum passengers were suddenly stranded, their tickets worthless, their travel plans in ruins. The airline staff, pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, gate agents, showed up to work only to find themselves jobless, their company's gates shuttered, their futures uncertain. Brenda Walsh was seen weeping at the JFK customer service desk, overwhelmed by a tide of angry stranded travelers. Claire, the purser from Flight 117, learned she was unemployed via a text message from a colleague while she was still in Geneva. And on Ethereum Global Flight 117, which had been diverted to Gander, Newfoundland, the passengers were finally told the truth. Their connecting flights were gone. The airline was gone. They were stuck. Harrison Thorne sat in his first-class suite, the luxurious pod now feeling like a prison cell. The Scotch had long since lost its appeal. He had spent the flight frantically making calls, trying to salvage his deal, trying to do damage control, but it was useless. His partners had abandoned him. His reputation was in tatters. The name Harrison Thorne was now inextricably linked to the biggest airline collapse in a decade, and not as a brilliant financier, but as the arrogant fool who brought it all down. When the pilot announced the FAA grounding and the diversion to Gander, a small, bitter laugh escaped Thorne's lips. The irony was suffocating. In his quest to get to Geneva with maximum speed and comfort, he had managed to strand himself in a remote Canadian town. As the passengers deplaned into the small, functional Gander terminal, all semblance of class distinction vanished. Thorne, with his cashmere blazer and Patek Philippe watch, was just another stranded passenger in a long, slow-moving line for immigration. His Ethereum-linked corporate credit cards were declined. His chairman's circle status was a meaningless joke. He tried to book a new flight, but the airport's limited services were completely overwhelmed. There were no private jets available. There were no first-class seats on other airlines. There was only the cold, hard reality of his situation. He watched as a family with crying children tried to figure out where they would sleep. He saw a young couple who had been on their honeymoon staring at their phones in disbelief. He was surrounded by the human collateral damage of his own hubris. For the first time in his pampered, privileged life, Harrison Thorne was truly powerless. The next morning, Anya and Ben boarded their new flight to Geneva. They were personally escorted to their seats by the airline station manager. The suite was even more luxurious than Etherea's, the service impeccable, but the luxury was no longer the point. As they settled in, Anya saw a newspaper on a nearby seat. The front-page photo was of Harrison Thorne, looking haggard and lost, standing in the crowded Gander airport terminal. The headline read, "The Billionaire Who Grounded an Airline." Anya's keynote address at the conference in Geneva was a triumph. She spoke with passion and brilliance about the vast, interconnected nature of the universe. But she began her speech with an unexpected preamble. Sometimes, she said, looking out at the rapt audience of scientists and academics, a small, seemingly insignificant event can trigger a cascading failure that brings down a massive system. A tiny gravitational anomaly can alter the path of a galaxy, and a single act of injustice, a refusal to be rendered invisible, can expose the rot at the core of a powerful corporation. The universe, in its beautiful complexity, has a way of balancing its own equations. It seems that sometimes, so does life on Earth. She and Ben did take their trip to the Alps. Surrounded by the silent, majestic beauty of the mountains, they felt a profound sense of peace. Their story had become a symbol of standing up to bullies, of the power of social media to enact change, and of the simple, enduring strength of human dignity. Harrison Thorne eventually made it out of Gander, but he returned to a world that had turned on him. He was facing multiple lawsuits from Ethereum shareholders. His investment fund was hemorrhaging clients. The SEC had opened an investigation into his attempted acquisition of the airline. He was a pariah in the business community, a cautionary tale whispered about in boardrooms and at country clubs. He had saved a few minutes of his precious time and secured his favorite seat, but in doing so, he had lost his empire. The hard karma had come for him, not in a bolt of lightning from the heavens, but in the quiet, inexorable calculus of consequence. The story of Anya Sharma and Ben Carter is a stark and powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small they may seem, can have monumental consequences. What started in the quiet luxury of a first-class cabin became a global headline, not just because of the injustice, but because two people refused to accept it. They demonstrated that integrity is not for sale and dignity has no price tag. Harrison Thorne learned the hard way that true power isn't about wealth or status, it's about character. His arrogance created the perfect storm that exposed a corrupt system and brought his own world crashing down. It's a real-life lesson in karma, a testament to the idea that in the end, we all land exactly where we deserve to be. If you believe that decency and respect should always win, and that karma is a force to be reckoned with, then please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss another story of justice being served. What would you have done in Anya and Ben's situation? Let us know in the comments below.